You want to see us there. Meanwhile, we need to talk about something which we often talk about on this programme, which is about the housing market and indeed perhaps some of the problems that exist within the housing market. I hesitate myself to use the word crisis. I'm not sure that crisis is the right way to describe a market that isn't necessarily functioning as it should, where supply and demand don't necessarily meet. One of the solutions to that might be something called modular housing. But would you buy a house that's made in a factory? We need to find out more. Andrew Shepard is the Managing Director of TopHat and joins me now. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very good, and thank you for joining us here on Talk Radio. So, before we get sort of tucked into whether there's a housing crisis and the environmental aspects and everything else, what exactly is modular housing? Do you really make the houses that you manufacture in a factory?
Yes, absolutely. So modular housing is typically a house that will be 75 to 80% completed in a factory. It is built in modules in what are essentially very, very large boxes. And 2 to 3 boxes are put together on site, zipped up, and you have a new house. So rather than taking 12 to 18 weeks to build a house, you're potentially taking 4 to 6 weeks.
Now, there are connotations on this, aren't there? Because many people, if you say, well, you build a house in a factory, or they use the word modular, here in the UK, they start to think of prefab, and that has negative connotations. I'm assuming that prefab and modular are two very different things.
Absolutely. And the analogy that I always tend to use in this case is if we look at prefab, we're thinking about the 1950s. And if you're thinking about 1950s cars built in the UK and cars built in the UK today, you're looking at very, very different technologies, very different solutions. And the seismic shift in manufacturing here in the UK from the 1950s prefab to the modern 2020s modular house is incomparable. So the market has come on a long way. The technology's come on a long way too.
So what do you think, though, we've got to do as a society to convince people that this is something that they should consider? Because, say, for example, if you were in Japan and you said to somebody, would you like to live in a modular house, the Japanese will jump at it. There's a premium for living in this kind of construction sort of method box, if you like. Whereas here in the UK, we still sort of prefer, you know, the leaky old houses, the ones that are built by traditional house builders, or even better, let's go and buy something that was built in the 18th or 19th century. Lovely. Or even older. Thatch roof that leaks and has mice in it. Even fantastic. We love it. Well, you know, how do we convince people that this is a real solution?
Well, your earlier question kind of alluded to it. We need to build homes that are exceptionally good quality. You ask many of the big house builders, or if I ask the chief executive and most of the last house builders, do you live in a house that you built? Most of them will tell you they live in a house that was built in the 1880s or the 1890s. That tells you as much as you need to know. What we want is to build houses that people want to live in because they're great quality and great design. People demand better housing now because we live in a COVID crisis where people are spending much more time in their house. So we need houses that have great daylight, great space. So we need to deliver homes that are fit for today and fit for the future.
Okay, so let's talk about TopHat. You're supported by the investment bank Goldman Sachs, so clearly open for business. What's the aim for the company? What are you trying to achieve?
So the business wants to change the dynamic, and actually, as you rightly point out, they want to shift the thought process that people are actually buying a house that is modular because actually it's better than a traditionally built home. So for us as an organisation, what we're looking to do is deliver those incredibly high quality homes. We want to actually provide the additional capacity within the market. One of the biggest challenges the market has at the moment is we don't have enough bricklayers. We come to think about how houses are built now. We have a number of people stood on sites putting blocks on top of blocks and bricks on top of bricks in the rain, in 2 to 3 degrees weather. Whereas we think it's much better to do that in climate-controlled environments with machine-cut precision, delivering much higher quality homes.
Now, it sort of makes sense, I think, once you get over the psychological impact, if you like, of a house being made in a factory and then shipped in large pieces. I mean, if you have a look at office buildings, some of the greatest buildings that we have around here in the UK, you walk around the City of London or indeed anywhere, a lot of those buildings are made in pieces and then sort of like clipped together, and people seem to be perfectly relaxed about that, and yet we still have this psychological problem, I think, perhaps about homes. What are the advantages, though, when it comes to, say, for example, the climate? There are some people who are sceptical about that, but there are others who would say, even if you're sceptical about the climate, what you can't be sceptical about is if a house is well insulated, you will pay less for your bills. So regardless of your views, surely that's a good thing.
That's the simple analogy. And often those with the highest bills are those that can least afford to pay them. If we think about the poor quality housing stock that sits in many areas in the UK, we've got people living in fuel poverty. Probably 2.5 to 3 million people have huge bills, and they're spending a large proportion of their income on heating their houses. If you live in an energy efficient house, I mean, for example, we know that our houses cost less than 90 pence a day to heat, to light, and to provide hot water. If you're moving in from a typical 1950s prefab, you might be paying £1,800 a year for exactly the same provision of services.
So how much of a saving, out of interest, how much of a saving is that? So just in terms of, so we can just identify, this is the advantage of living in this kind of house compared to a slightly more traditional one.
A 1950s, you'd be saving up to 80% against your bills. So a huge difference for the person living in that house.
Now, just finally to you, as we think about the future and the housing stock, how do we get this method of construction, if you like, on the mainstream agenda? Because at the moment, when you talk to government, they don't really think that this is one of the options. But it sounds like if you were able to scale up, this could be an answer to not only providing a lot of housing, but actually a lot of housing that's of good quality, because that's arguably one of the problems that we've had in the past. Government provides housing, or low-cost or affordable housing is provided, and it's shocking.
Yes, we need a seismic shift in terms of the quality of housing we're producing in the UK, higher standards, higher environmental sustainability standards as well. So we think there's the opportunity is ripe now to do that. Government has actually shifted its thought process. It recently announced that any Homes England funding needed to be delivered 20% by modern methods of construction, modular construction. So there is definitely a dynamic shift within government, and it does seem to be that government are now very supportive of what we're trying to do.
Well, it's certainly something that we're going to keep an eye on, and I'm sure we will speak again. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us this morning and explaining a little bit more about Top Hat and what you do and making houses in a factory. That's Andrew Shepard, Managing Director at Top Hat. So, coming